Welcome to Mystic Bedtime Stories, where ancient wisdom meets peaceful slumber. I'm here to guide you through the gentle currents of history, where great civilizations whisper their secrets to help you find the deepest, most restorative sleep. Tonight, we journey to a place where marble columns still catch moonlight, where the echoes of profound thoughts drift on Mediterranean breezes. This is a story for those who seek not just rest, but a connection to something timeless and beautiful. Whether you're winding down after a long day or seeking solace in the quiet hours, let this tale of Athens carry you to a place of profound peace. Close your eyes now and let yourself drift back through time. Feel the warm Mediterranean breeze against your skin as you find yourself standing among towering columns of pristine white marble. These ancient stones have weathered 2.5 millennia, yet they still gleam softly in the eternal light of memory. You are in Athens, but not the Athens of today with its bustling streets and modern sounds. This is the Athens of dreams, where the whispers of ancient wisdom still float on the evening air like jasmine petals carried by the wind. Breathe deeply and let the scent of olive groves fill your lungs. In the distance, you can hear the gentle lapping of waves against the harbor of Piraeus, where merchant ships once brought treasures from across the known world. The sound is rhythmic, hypnotic, like a lullaby sung by the sea itself. As you stand here in this timeless place, imagine that the marble beneath your feet holds within it the footsteps of philosophers and poets, of citizens and statesmen who once walked these very paths. Socrates may have paused here to ask a question that would echo through eternity. Plato might have gazed up at these same stars, pondering the nature of truth and beauty. The Acropolis rises before you like a sacred mountain, its temples catching the last golden rays of a sun that has set on this city thousands of times. Yet somehow, in this moment, time feels suspended. The past and present merge into something eternal, something peaceful. Feel the cool stone of a column against your palm. Its surface is smooth, worn by countless hands across countless years. Yet it remains strong, enduring. Like the ideas that were born here, it has survived wars and conquests, seasons of glory and periods of darkness. Tonight, you are not just a visitor to this ancient place. You are a witness to one of humanity's greatest stories. A tale of a small city that dared to dream of democracy, that birthed philosophy and theater, that reached toward the highest aspirations of the human spirit. The evening air grows softer, now wrapping around you like a gentle embrace. In the growing twilight, you can almost see the shadows of those who came before, moving with quiet purpose among these sacred spaces. Their voices blend into a soft murmur, speaking of courage and wisdom, of beauty and truth, of the eternal questions that still stir the human heart. Let yourself settle into this peaceful scene. There is no hurry here, no urgent demands. Only the patient stones and the whispering wind, ready to tell you a story that has been waiting centuries to be heard again. A story of a city that rose from humble beginnings to touch the very stars, and in its falling, gave the world gifts that will never fade. As the stars begin to emerge in the darkening sky above the Parthenon, you feel a deep sense of tranquility washing over you. This is where our journey begins, in this place where marble meets moonlight, where ancient wisdom meets the eternal peace of a quiet evening. The story of Athens is about to unfold before you, gentle as a breeze, soft as starlight, carrying you toward the most restful sleep you have known in ages. Long before there were philosophers debating in marble halls, long before democracy was even a dream, there was simply a hill, a rocky outcrop rising from the fertile plain of Attica, crowned with wild olive trees that rustled in the salt-scented wind from the Aegean Sea. This hill, which would one day be called the Acropolis, stood patient and silent under the endless Greek sky, waiting for its story to begin. Picture yourself walking slowly up the winding path that ancient feet once wore smooth. The stones beneath your sandals are warm from the day's sun, and the air carries the drowsy hum of cicadas settling into evening song. This is Athens in its infancy, when the boundary between the mortal world and the realm of the gods was as thin as morning mist. The first people who made their homes on these gentle slopes were simple folk, farmers who knew the secret language of olive trees and grapevines, herders who could read the weather in the flight of birds, potters whose hands shaped clay while their minds shaped stories. They built their modest homes of sun-dried brick and timber, clustering together like flowers, seeking the same patch of sunlight dot in the soft light of oil lamps. As families gathered for their evening meals, the old stories were told and retold, stories of how this place came to bear the name Athens. The tale speaks of a contest between two mighty gods, each offering a gift to claim patronage of this humble settlement. Poseidon, lord of the restless seas, struck the rocky ground with his trident. Up surged a spring of water, powerful and strong. But the people tasted it and found it salt, like the tears of the ocean itself. Then Athena, gray-eyed goddess of wisdom, knelt and planted something small in the earth. From her gift grew the first olive tree, its silver-green leaves whispering. Promises of oil for lamps, food for sustenance, and wood for tools. The people chose wisdom over raw power. They chose the patient gift that would nourish rather than the dramatic gesture that would dazzle. In making this choice, perhaps they set the character of their city for all the centuries to come. Feel the evening breeze now, carrying with it the scent of those ancient olive groves. The trees that Athena supposedly blessed still grow on these hills, their roots reaching deep into soil that has witnessed the birth of ideas that change the world. Their leaves catch the moonlight like scattered silver coins, rustling with secrets only they remember. In those early days, life moved with the rhythm of seasons rather than the urgency of ambition. Spring brought the soft green of new growth, summer the gold of ripening grain, autumn the purple richness of grape harvests, and winter the silver peace of rain on stone. The people lived close to the earth, and closer still to their gods, seeing divine presence in every spring, every grove, every sunrise painting the marble cliffs with rose and gold. The Acropolis in those days was not yet crowned with temples. Instead, it served as a natural fortress where the community could retreat in times of danger. Simple altars marked sacred spaces, and festivals followed the ancient calendar of planting and harvest, birth and death, the eternal cycles that connect all living things. Children played in the olive groves while their parents worked, there, laughter echoing off the limestone rocks. Old men sat in the shade, weaving baskets and sharing memories, their voices becoming part of the timeless conversation between past and future. Women gathered at the wells, their conversations flowing like the clear water they drew, carrying news and wisdom from household to household. This was Athens before it became Athens, a community held together not by laws written on stone tablets, but by bonds as natural as the olive roots that intertwined beneath the soil. Here, in this peaceful setting, the seeds of something extraordinary were quietly taking root, though no one could have imagined the magnitude of what was to come. As night deepens around our ancient hill, feel yourself settling into the rhythm of that simpler time, the gentle persistence of olive trees growing, a patient work of hands shaping clay, the quiet confidence of a people who chose wisdom over spectacle, depth over display. In this place where myth and reality danced together under the eternal stars, the story of one of humanity's greatest experiments was just beginning to unfold, as naturally and inevitably as morning follows night. The sun rises over Athens as it has for countless mornings, painting the olive groves in shades of gold and amber. But this morning is different, though the change is as subtle as the shift from night to dawn. Something new is stirring in the hearts of the people, a quiet revolution that will echo through all the ages to come. Walk with me now through the narrow streets of the growing city. The air is filled with the gentle sounds of daily life awakening. Potters are already at their wheels, their hands moving in the ancient dance of creation, shaping vessels that will hold wine and oil and the dreams of generations. The rhythmic scraping of their tools against clay creates a peaceful melody that mingles with the distant bleating of goats on the hillsides. In the Agora, a marketplace that beats like the heart of the city, merchants are arranging their wares with the careful precision of those who understand that beauty and utility can be one and the same. Amphorae filled with honey gleam like captured sunlight. Bolts of cloth dyed in deep blues and warm reds catch the morning breeze. The scent of fresh bread mingles with the salt air drifting up from the harbor. But listen more closely now, and you'll hear something else woven into these familiar sounds. Voices raised not in argument, but in earnest conversation. Men gathering not just to trade goods, but to trade ideas. For the first time in human memory, ordinary people are beginning to believe that their voices matter, that their thoughts have weight in the running of their community. This transformation didn't happen overnight, like a lightning flash illuminating the darkness. Instead, it grew slowly, naturally, like the olive trees that had learned to thrive in this rocky soil. The seeds of change were planted by a man named Solon, whose name even now carries the weight of wisdom earned through compassion rather than conquest. Solon was not a king or a warrior, but something rarer still, a leader who listened more than he spoke. He saw the suffering of farmers, crushed beneath debts they could never repay, families torn apart when fathers were sold into slavery to settle what they owed. He witnessed the growing divide between those who had much and those who had nothing, and he understood that a city built on such inequality could not long stand. Picture Solon in the quiet hour before dawn, walking alone among the olive trees, their silver leaves catching the first pale light of morning. In that sacred stillness, he contemplated a radical idea. What if the bonds of debt that enslaved so many could simply be forgiven? What if the slate could be wiped clean, allowing everyone to begin again? The wealthy protested, of course. They had grown comfortable with the old ways, where power flowed like water, seeking the lowest ground, always downward, always concentrating in the same familiar places. But Solon possessed that rarest of political virtues. He could imagine a future different from the past. With the stroke of a stylus on wax tablets, he freed the enslaved debtors. He redistributed some of the land that had been concentrated in too few hands. Most importantly, he opened the assemblies to citizens who had never before been asked for their opinions on matters of common concern. The potter and the farmer, the sailor and the merchant, could now stand in the same circle and speak their minds. Feel the weight of that moment when voices that had been silent for generations suddenly discovered they had the right to be heard. Imagine the hesitation in that first raised hand, the nervous clearing of a throat before speaking words that might actually matter. There's something deeply moving about ordinary people realizing they are not so ordinary after all, that their experiences and insights have value in the great conversation of community life. This new system wasn't perfect. Women remained silent, their wisdom confined to the private spaces of home and hearth. Slaves continued to serve, their voices still unheard in the public sphere. The democracy of Athens was like a flower just beginning to bloom, beautiful, but not yet fully open to the light. But what had begun could not be easily stopped. The idea that free citizens might govern themselves, that wisdom might emerge from the collective rather than descend from above, took root in the Athenian soil, like the olive trees blessed by their patron goddess. Another name joins our story. Now, Cleisthenes, whose vision carried Solon's work even further into uncharted territory. Where Solon had been like a careful gardener, removing the weeds that choked healthy growth, Cleisthenes was like an architect of the soul, designing structures that would allow human potential to flourish. Walk with Cleisthenes now through the demes, the local neighborhoods that formed the building blocks of his democratic vision. Each deme was like a small community within the larger city, where citizens could practice the arts of self-governance on a scale intimate enough to be meaningful. Here, neighbors who had known each other since childhood could debate the issues that affected their daily lives. The genius of Cleisthenes lay not just in his grand vision, but in his understanding of human nature. He knew that democracy couldn't simply be imposed from above like a new law or regulation. It had to grow organically from the soil of real relationships, real conversations, real communities where people felt safe to speak their minds and trust that they would be heard. He created the system of ostracism, not as punishment, but as a safety valve for a community learning to manage its own conflicts. Once a year, citizens could vote to send someone into temporary exile, not for any crime, but simply because their presence had become too divisive for the health of the whole. It was democracy's way of saying, we value harmony over any individual, ambition, even our own. The ecclesia, the great assembly of citizens, became the beating heart of this new experiment. Picture it now, thousands of men gathering on the hillside of the Pnyx, their faces turned toward the speakers, who rose to address questions of war and peace, justice and prosperity, the great issues that would shape their common future. There was something almost mystical about these gatherings, when individual voices merged into something larger than themselves. Not the roar of a mob, but the thoughtful murmur of a community thinking aloud, weighing options, seeking wisdom in the collective experience of free people. The air would be filled with the sounds of democracy, learning to breathe, the rustle of citizens adjusting their positions on the stone seats, the scratch of pottery shards being marked for votes, the quiet conversations that rippled through the crowd as ideas took shape and found their form. As evening approaches and the last light fades from the Athenian sky, feel the satisfaction of a day spent in meaningful participation. These weren't professional politicians or trained orators, but ordinary people who had discovered something extraordinary, that they were capable of governing themselves with wisdom, compassion, and a shared commitment to the common good. The olive trees rustle in the evening breeze, their leaves whispering approval of this bold experiment. In the distance, the harbor reflects the last light of day, and boats rock gently at anchor, their sails furled, their crews resting after honest labor. This is how democracy was born in Athens, not with fanfare or grand proclamations, but with the quiet recognition that every citizen carries within themselves a spark of the divine wisdom that guides communities toward justice and flourishing. Like seeds planted in good soil, these ideas would grow beyond what their planters could ever imagine, spreading across centuries and continents, taking root wherever people dared to believe in their own capacity for self-governance. Dawn breaks over Athens, but this is a different dawn than any the world has seen before. The light seems brighter somehow, as if the very air has been touched by divine inspiration. This is the Athens of Pericles, a city that has learned to dream with marble and stone, to speak its highest aspirations in columns that reach toward heaven itself. Step with me now into the heart of the 5th century before Christ, when Athens wore her beauty like a crown and her wisdom like a gentle smile. The morning sun catches the white marble of the Parthenon, still under construction on the sacred hill of the Acropolis, and the light seems to dance with joy across its perfect proportions. Listen to the sounds that fill the air in this golden time. The gentle tapping of sculptors' chisels rings out like a symphony written in stone. Each strike is deliberate, purposeful, guided by hands that understand they are creating not just decoration, but prayers made visible. The marble dust catches the sunlight like powdered starlight, settling softly on the shoulders of men who work as if they are collaborating with the gods themselves. Pericles moves through this bustling scene like a conductor guiding an orchestra, of extraordinary complexity. But he is no tyrant imposing his will through force. Instead, he leads by the power of his vision, by his ability to help others see what Athens might become when her people dare to reach for excellence in all things. Watch him pause beside a master sculptor working on a figure for the temple's pediment. The two men speak quietly, their voices blending with the morning sounds of creative labor. There's no hurry in their conversation, no sense of deadline pressure. Instead, there's the deep satisfaction of craftsmen who know they are creating something that will outlast their own brief lives, something beautiful enough to honor both their gods and their descendants. The Parthenon rising on the Acropolis is more than a temple, more than architecture. It is Athens speaking her deepest truth in a language of mathematical perfection and sublime proportion. Every column has been calculated to create an optical illusion of perfect straightness, because the builders understood that true perfection must account for the limitations of human perception. Even the gods, they seem to believe, would appreciate such thoughtful artistry. But the golden age of Athens was not built on marble alone. Walk now through the streets below the Acropolis, and you'll discover that the true treasure of this remarkable time lies in the conversations that flower like gardens in every corner of the city. In the shade of plane trees, small groups gather around teachers whose names will echo through eternity. Here sits Anaxagoras, explaining to his students that the sun is not a god, but a blazing stone larger than the Peloponnese. His words both shocking and thrilling to minds that have always accepted mystery as the natural state of existence. Nearby, Sophocles rehearses with his chorus for the next performance at the theater of Dionysus. Their voices rise and fall in practiced harmony, exploring the deepest questions of human existence through the ancient art of tragic drama. What does it mean to be morally responsible when the gods themselves seem to play with human fate? Can wisdom be learned, or must it be suffered? The questions hang in the air like incense, sacred and transformative. The Agora has become more than a marketplace now. It is a living classroom where ideas are traded with the same care that merchants once reserved for precious goods. Stalls selling pottery and cloth stand beside informal schools where young men from across the Mediterranean world come to learn the new arts of rhetoric and philosophy. Feel the excitement in the air, the sense that Athens has become a magnet for every brilliant mind in the known world. Artists arrive carrying nothing but their talents and their dreams, knowing that in this city, excellence is not just appreciated, but actively cultivated. Poets come seeking audiences sophisticated enough to appreciate their finest work. Philosophers find students eager to grapple with questions that have no easy answers. Pericles himself embodies this flowering of Athenian culture. Listen to him address the assembled citizens on a soft evening when the work of democracy unfolds like a carefully tended garden. His voice carries the authority of someone who has earned the right to lead, not through birthright or conquest, but through the patient demonstration of wisdom and integrity. He speaks of Athens as the school of Hellas, a city that teaches by example rather than preaching. He reminds his listeners that they are not just building temples and theaters, but creating a way of life that honors both individual excellence and collective responsibility. Every citizen has the opportunity to contribute to something larger than themselves, yet no one is forced to sacrifice their unique gifts on the altar of conformity. The evening light grows softer now, painting the marble columns with shades of rose and gold. In the theater carved into the hillside below the Acropolis, citizens gather for the annual festival of Dionysus. Here, the tragedies of Aeschylus and Sophocles will explore the deepest mysteries of human existence, while the comedies of Aristophanes will remind everyone that laughter is as essential to the human spirit as tears. Picture yourself among the audience, feeling the collective intake of breath as the chorus speaks truths too dangerous for everyday conversation. These are not entertainments in our modern sense, but communal rituals where the entire city examines its own soul. The questions raised in these performances will be discussed in homes and workshops for months to come, becoming part of the ongoing conversation that is Athenian democracy. As night deepens, the city settles into a rhythm of contentment earned through meaningful work. In workshops throughout Athens, artisans put the finishing touches on pottery that will carry the city's aesthetic ideals to distant shores. Red-figured vases bloom with scenes of gods and heroes, but also with images of ordinary life elevated to the level of art. Athletes training for competition, symposiums where friends gather to share wine and wisdom, women at their looms creating textiles of extraordinary beauty. The Parthenon stands completed now in your imagination, its columns glowing softly in the moonlight. It will endure for millennia, but even more enduring will be the ideas that flourished in its shadow. The notion that a community can govern itself wisely. The belief that every citizen has both the right and the responsibility to participate in the great conversations that shape collective life. The understanding that excellence in art and thought and character is not a luxury, but a necessity for any society that hopes to flourish. Feel the peace that settles over golden Athens as the stars emerge overhead. This is not the peace of exhaustion, but the deep satisfaction of a community that has learned to channel its energies toward purposes worthy of its highest aspirations. The olive trees rustle with contentment, their silver leaves catching starlight like captured wisdom. In the distance, the harbor reflects the gentle light of oil lamps from ships that have come from every corner of the Mediterranean world, drawn by the reputation of this extraordinary city. Sailors and merchants, scholars and artists all find welcome here, their diverse gifts adding new colors to the rich tapestry of Athenian life. This is Athens at the height of her glory, when democracy and art, philosophy and architecture, individual excellence and collective wisdom merged into something the world had never seen before and would spend centuries trying to recapture. Rest. Now, in the warm glow of that achievement, feeling the deep satisfaction that comes from witnessing human potential fulfilled in all its radiant possibilities. In the gentle afternoon light that filters through the olive groves surrounding Athens, where shadows dance softly on ancient pathways, we find ourselves walking among the greatest minds that ever graced this marble city. The year is around 430 BCE, and Athens pulses not just with political energy, but with something far more enduring, the rhythm of human thought itself. Close your eyes and imagine you're strolling through the Agra, that bustling heart of Athenian life. The air carries the scent of fresh bread and the distant murmur of voices engaged in the most important conversations humanity has ever known. Here, beneath the spreading plane trees, philosophy was born not in dusty libraries or ivory towers, but in the warm sunlight of everyday life. There, by the marble fountain where merchants pause to water their donkeys, stands a man unlike any other. Socrates, now in his late 60s, moves with the unhurried grace of someone who has discovered that the most important journey is inward. His appearance is unremarkable sandaled feet, a simple tunic that has seen better days, and a face that some might call homely. But his eyes hold something that draws people like moths to flame, an insatiable curiosity about what it means to be human. Watch as he approaches a young politician, confident and eager to make his mark on Athens. "Tell me," Socrates says in his gentle, almost musical voice, "you speak often of justice in the assembly. What is justice?" The young man begins to answer with practiced phrases, the kind that usually impress crowds. But Socrates listens with such genuine interest, asks such simple yet penetrating questions, that soon the politician finds himself admitting he's never really thought deeply about what justice actually means. This is the Socratic method in its purest form, not a lecture, not a sermon, but a conversation that peels away layers of assumption, like removing the papery skin from an onion. Socrates never claims to have answers. Instead, he reveals that the wisest thing any person can know is how much they don't know. The unexamined life is not worth living, he will later say. And in this simple phrase lies a revolution in human thinking. As the afternoon light grows golden, we follow the sound of animated discussion to a grove of olive trees just outside the city walls. Here, a younger man named Plato sits with a small circle of students, their scrolls spread on simple wooden tables. Plato was a student of Socrates and later taught Aristotle. He founded the Academy, an academic program which many consider to be the first Western university. Plato's voice carries the authority of someone who has wrestled with the deepest questions and emerged with insights that will echo through centuries. He speaks of a realm beyond this physical world, a place where perfect forms of truth, beauty, and goodness exist in their purest state. The shadows dancing on the olive leaves remind him of his famous allegory of the cave, where most people mistake shadows on the wall for reality itself. But Plato's philosophy is not cold or abstract. Listen to the warmth in his voice as he describes his ideal republic, a city where wisdom guides power, where each person contributes according to their highest nature. It's a dream born from his love of Athens, even as he sees its flaws. The corruption he witnesses in politics, the injustices that can arise even in democracy, fuel his vision of something better. As evening approaches and the first stars appear. Above the Acropolis, the city takes on a different character. The formal business of day gives way to something more playful, more irreverent. From the theater of Dionysus comes the sound of laughter, not the polite chuckles of social gatherings, but the full-bodied, healing laughter that comes from recognizing truth through humor. Here stands Aristophanes, the master of comedy, the greatest representative of ancient Greek comedy, and the one whose works have been preserved in greatest quantity. His latest play pokes fun at everyone: politicians, generals, philosophers, even the gods themselves. Aristophanes lampooned the most important personalities and institutions of his day, as can be seen, for example, in his buffoonish portrayal of Socrates in the clouds. Watch the audience: citizens from every walk of life, united in laughter. A potter sits next to a wealthy merchant, both wiping tears from their eyes as Aristophanes' characters expose the absurdities of their society. The playwright's genius lies not in cruelty, but in his ability to hold up a mirror to Athens and show its people both their greatness and their follies. Through comedy, he performs a kind of civic therapy, allowing the city to laugh at itself and perhaps, in laughing, to heal. The beauty of Athens in this golden age is that these three streams of thought, Socratic questioning, Platonic idealism, and Aristophanic satire, flow together like tributaries of the same river. In the morning, a citizen might attend the assembly and participate in democracy. In the afternoon, he might join a philosophical discussion in the agora. In the evening, he might laugh at a comedy that skewers everything he took seriously during the day. This is what made Athens extraordinary. It wasn't just that great thinkers lived there. Many cities have had their wise men. It was that wisdom, beauty, and laughter were woven into the very fabric of daily life. Philosophy wasn't an academic exercise. It was as essential as bread. Poetry wasn't entertainment for the elite. It was nourishment for the soul of every citizen. As you imagine yourself walking these ancient streets, feel the warm stones beneath your feet, hear the gentle splash of fountains, smell the wild herbs growing between the marble blocks. The voices of Socrates, Plato, and Aristophanes seem to echo still in the evening air, their words as fresh and vital as they were 25 centuries ago. In this city of white marble and endless questions, of noble dreams and healing laughter, the human spirit found its voice. And in finding that voice, Athens gave the world something imperishable, the understanding that to be fully human, we must think deeply, dream boldly, and never lose our ability to smile at our own contradictions. The philosophers and poets of Athens were not separate from the city's political and civic life. They were its very soul, its deepest expression of what it means to live together in pursuit of truth, beauty, and the good life. They transformed Athens from merely a place of power into a place of wisdom, from a city of marble into a city of light dot, and now, as the Mediterranean stars shine down on the quiet Agra, as the olive trees whisper in the gentle night breeze, we can almost hear their voices still questioning, dreaming, laughing, reminding us that the most important conversations are not about what we own or what we've conquered, but about who we are and who we might become. Picture, if you will, the gentle morning mist rising from the Aegean Sea as dawn breaks over the coast of Marathon. The year is 490 BCE, and along the sandy shore where wild herbs scent the air, history is about to change forever. But this is not a story of conquest or empire building. This is a story about ordinary people who discovered something extraordinary about themselves when faced with the impossible. Close your eyes and let yourself drift back to that September morning 25 centuries ago. The Persian fleet had arrived like storm clouds on the horizon, their ships darkening the waters with their sheer number. The battle was fought between the citizens of Athens, aided by Plataea, and a Persian force commanded by Gades and Artaparens, representing the mighty empire of King Darius I. Imagine standing among the Athenian farmers, potters, and merchants who had taken up their shields and spears. These were not professional soldiers in the way we might think of them today. They were citizens who had left their workshops in olive groves to defend something they couldn't quite put into words, a way of life, a belief that ordinary people could govern themselves, a dream that wisdom might triumph over mere power. Persian army was magnificent to behold, with their colorful robes and gleaming weapons, their discipline honed through years of conquest across vast empires. They had never known defeat. Yet as the sun climbed higher and the moment of battle approached, something remarkable happened among the Greek ranks. They were the first of the Greeks who introduced the custom of charging the enemy at a run, and they were likewise the first who dared to look upon the Persian garb and to face men clad in that fashion. Listen to the sound of bronze shields clanging against bronze armor, the rhythmic thud of thousands of sandaled feet running across the sandy plain. On the Marathon, plain of northeastern Attica, the Athenians, in a single afternoon, repulsed the first Persian invasion of Greece. It was a victory that would go down in folklore as the moment the Greek city-states showed the world their courage and excellence, and won their liberty. But the victory at Marathon was more than a military triumph. As you imagine the Greek soldiers pursuing the retreating Persians back to their ships, feel the electric realization that must have coursed through every Athenian heart. They had faced the greatest empire the world had ever known and emerged victorious. Not through superior numbers or better equipment, but through something more intangible, their belief in themselves and in their way of life. The runner who carried news of victory back to Athens covered those 26 miles in a state that was part exhaustion, part exhilaration. When he gasped out, "We have won," before collapsing, he wasn't just announcing a military victory. He was proclaiming that democracy, that fragile experiment in human self-governance, had proven it could defend itself against the mightiest forces of tyranny. Now let the years drift by like clouds over the Acropolis, and join us 10 years later, in the narrow straits between the mainland and the island of Salamis. The morning light dances on waters that will soon witness arguably the largest naval battle of the ancient world. The Persian king Xerxes has returned with an even mightier force, and Athens itself lies in ruins behind us. This time, the odds seem truly impossible. By 480, the Persian king Xerxes and his army had overrun much of Greece, and his fleet dwarfs the assembled Greek ships like eagles surrounding sparrows. From his golden throne on the hillside, Xerxes watches confidently, expecting to witness the final destruction of Greek resistance. But in the pre-dawn darkness, Athenian admiral Themistocles has devised a plan born of desperate wisdom. Rather than flee to open waters, where the Persian numbers would overwhelm them, he draws the enemy fleet into the narrow straits, where their very size becomes a disadvantage. Athenian commander Themistocles lured the larger Persian fleet into the narrow strait of Salamis, and the confined waters negated the Persian numerical advantage. As morning light illuminates the straits, imagine the bronze beaks of Greek warships cutting through the waves. The Persian vessels, magnificent in open water, now struggle to maneuver in the confined space. Ships collide with their own allies, oars tangle, and the perfect order of the Persian fleet dissolves into chaos. It resulted in a victory for the outnumbered Greeks as the allied fleet attacked and scored a decisive victory, sinking or capturing at least 200 Persian ships. But listen beyond the crash of bronze and wood, beyond the shouts of victory. In this moment, something profound was being born in the human spirit. The Greeks weren't just defending their cities. They were proving that human ingenuity, courage, and unity could triumph over seemingly insurmountable odds. They were writing the first chapters of a story that would inspire countless generations. The story of free peoples standing together against tyranny. The Greek victory proved to be the turning point in the war, for the Persian king, Xerxes, returned to Asia with his surviving ships and the majority of his forces. But the real victory was deeper than military strategy. It was the realization that democracy, messy, argumentative, sometimes chaotic democracy possessed a strength that even the most powerful empire couldn't break. Picture the aftermath. As Greek sailors and soldiers embrace on the decks of their battered ships, these men had looked into the face of absolute power and had not blinked. They had discovered that when free people unite for a common cause, when they fight not for conquest, but for the right to live according to their own choices, they become capable of miracles. The Persian wars were not just about Athens versus Persia. They were about two different visions of human society. On one side stood an empire where the will of one man, however wise or powerful, determined the fate of millions. On the other stood a collection of small cities where citizens gathered in assemblies to argue, debate, and decide their common future. As the news of Salamis spread across the Greek world, it carried more than reports of ships sunk and enemies defeated. It carried the revolutionary message that ordinary people, when they stand together in defense of their freedom, possess a power that no tyrant can ultimately defeat. It proclaimed that wisdom and courage, not just wealth and numbers, determine the fate of nations. The veterans who returned to Athens from Marathon and Salamis brought with them not just victory laurels, but a transformed understanding of what it meant to be citizens of a democracy. They had tested their ideals in the crucible of existence itself and found them strong enough to withstand any trial. In the quiet evening that follows our imagined journey through these ancient battles, feel the gentle breeze that carries the scent of wild thyme and olive blossoms. The heroes of Marathon and Salamis have long since returned to dust, but their legacy flows like an underground river through all of human history. Every time ordinary people stand up to defend their rights, every time citizens choose courage over comfort, every time democracy faces down its enemies, the spirit of those long ago warriors stirs again. These were not just military victories. They were affirmations of the human spirit, proof that freedom, once tasted, creates a strength that empires cannot break. In defending Athens, those citizen soldiers were defending something larger than their city. They were defending the radical idea that human beings are capable of governing themselves, that wisdom can triumph over power, and that the future belongs not to those who would rule others, but to those who would rule themselves. The waves still wash the shores of Marathon, and the straits of Salamis still reflect the same Mediterranean. stars. But now they carry the eternal echo of ordinary people who did extraordinary things, who proved that the greatest victories are not conquests of territory, but conquests of the human spirit over its own limitations. Imagine standing on the walls of Athens as the first autumn winds of 431 BCE whisper through the olive groves below. The leaves are beginning to turn, and there's a melancholy beauty in the air that seems to mirror the mood of the city. For the first time in living memory, Athenians are looking not outward toward distant Persian shores, but inward toward their own Greek brothers. The greatest tragedy in Greek history is about to unfold, not a tragedy written for the theater, but one that will be lived in blood and tears across the entire Hellenic world. The Peloponnesian War was fought between the two leading city-states in ancient Greece, Athens and Sparta, from 431 to 404 BCE, with each standing at the head of alliances. That included nearly every Greek city-state. Close your eyes and let yourself drift back to that fateful moment when the Greek world, united so recently against the Persian threat, began to tear itself apart. The roots of this conflict reached deep into the soil of success itself. Sparta had traditionally been stronger militarily than Athens, but Athens was stronger and richer as a result of tributes pouring in through the Delian League, an alliance that stretched across the Mediterranean. Picture Athens in those golden years after the Persian Wars, her harbor filled with ships bearing tribute from across the Aegean, her citizens walking proudly through the Agra, their democracy, the envy of the known world. But success, like wine, can intoxicate. The Delian League, originally formed as a defensive alliance against Persian aggression, had gradually transformed into something that looked uncomfortably like an Athenian empire. Island cities that had once sent ships to the common defense now sent silver instead. What had begun as a partnership among equals had become a relationship between ruler and ruled. In the mountain valleys of the Peloponnese, the Spartans watched this transformation with growing unease. Theirs was a different vision of Greek life, austere, disciplined, rooted in the belief that strength came not from wealth or philosophy, but from unwavering devotion to duty and the warrior's code. They saw Athens growing fat on tribute, her citizens spending their days in political debate and theatrical performances, while others did the hard work of defense. The more immediate reason for the war was Athenian control of the Delian League, the vast naval alliance that allowed it to dominate the Mediterranean Sea. The tension between these two visions of Greek life, Athenian democracy, and intellectual freedom versus Spartan discipline and military virtue, had been building for decades like pressure in a sealed vessel. The spark that ignited this powder keg came from an unlikely source, the distant city of Corcyra, locked in a dispute with its mother city Corinth. When Athens chose to support Corcyra, it set in motion a chain of events that would consume the Greek world for the next 27 years. What began as a local squabble between trading partners escalated into a civilizational conflict that would determine the future of Greece itself. Picture the scene as the war began in earnest. Athens continued its domination of the sea while Sparta dominated the land. Each autumn, Spartan armies would march into Attica, their bronze shields gleaming in the Mediterranean sun, their red cloaks flowing like rivers of blood across the landscape. They came to burn the olive groves, to destroy the grain fields, to force Athens to come out and fight on Spartan terms. But Pericles, the wise leader of Athens, had a different strategy. Behind the safety of Athens' walls, the entire population of Attica crowded together farmers and their families, craftsmen and traders, all crammed into a city built for half their number. The strategy was simple. Let the Spartans burn the countryside while Athens used her naval supremacy to strike at Spartan allies across the Aegean. It was a war of patience, a test of wills between two fundamentally different ways of life. For the first year, the strategy seemed to work. The Spartan armies came and went like seasonal storms, causing damage but not defeat. Athens' ships ranged freely across the Aegean, and her treasury remained full. But then, in the summer of 430 BCE, something far more terrible than any Spartan army appeared within the walls of Athens. In 430 BC, a plague struck the city of Athens, which was then under siege by Sparta during the Peloponnesian War. In the next 3 years, most of the population was infected, and perhaps as many as 75,000 to 100,000 people, 25% of the city's population, died. The disease crept through the overcrowded streets like a silent enemy, more devastating than any army. Imagine the horror of those summer days when the plague first appeared. The origin of the epidemic occurred in sub-Saharan Africa, just south of Ethiopia, sweeping north and west through Egypt and Libya across the Mediterranean. It struck without warning, without mercy, without regard for wealth or wisdom or virtue. The symptoms were terrible to witness: fever, delirium, the breakdown of social order, as people abandoned hope and turned to desperate pleasures or resigned despair. In the narrow streets where philosophers once debated the nature of justice, bodies lay unburied. The temples where citizens had gathered to honor their gods fell silent except for the prayers of the dying. The plague killed nearly a third of the Athenian population in the summer of 430 and caused greater loss of human life than the rest of the war. It was as if the gods themselves had turned against the city that had dared to challenge the natural order. Among the victims was Pericles himself, the architect of Athenian greatness. It's believed Pericles died from the plague, though historians remain uncertain. Pericles himself succumbed to the plague, which was symbolic of Athens' decline. His death marked more than the loss of a leader. It symbolized the end of an era, the moment when Athens' golden age began to tarnish. The plague changed everything. The careful strategy of defensive warfare gave way to desperate expeditions and reckless gambles. The confident democracy that had once debated every decision with measured wisdom now lurched between extremes: 1 year voting for moderation, the next for the most aggressive military action. The city that had once been the light of the Greek world began to make decisions that would have been unthinkable in the time of Pericles. As the years dragged on, the war became a grinding, exhausting struggle that consumed the resources and spirit of both sides. In total, the war lasted for 27 years and resulted in the dramatic downfall of the Athenian Empire and the rise of Sparta as the dominant Greek city-state. Picture the Greek world in those middle years of the conflict fields lying fallow, harbors empty of merchant ships, young men dying in battles whose strategic purpose had been forgotten in the larger tragedy of the war itself. The moral fabric of Greek society began to unravel. Cities that had once shared common values and mutual respect now treated each other with a cruelty that shocked even the hardened warriors of the age. The massacre at Melos, where Athens offered no quarter to those who would not submit, became a symbol of how far the Greeks had fallen from their earlier ideals. Yet through all this darkness, there were still moments of extraordinary human grace. Spartan prisoners, expecting execution, were treated with unexpected kindness by their Athenian captors. Athenian generals, facing defeat, chose honor over survival. In the midst of a war that seemed to bring out humanity's worst impulses, individual acts of courage and compassion still flickered like candles in the wind. The war remained undecided until the later intervention of the Persian Empire in support of Sparta. Led by Lysander, the Spartan fleet built with Persian subsidies finally defeated Athens. The irony was bitter beyond measure. The Persians, whom Greeks had once united to defeat, now returned as the arbiters of Greek destiny. The gold that had once flowed to Athens from her empire now flowed to Sparta from her former enemies. The final scene of this long tragedy played out in the harbor of Athens in 404 BCE, This war shifted power from Athens to Sparta, making Sparta the most powerful city-state in the region. The last Athenian ships surrendered their proud democracy, replaced by a brutal oligarchy imposed by Spartan victors. The walls that had protected Athens for so long were torn down to the sound of flutes, as if the destruction were a celebration rather than a funeral. But even in defeat, something indestructible remained. The ideas that Athens had given to the world democracy, the rule of law, the belief that ordinary citizens could govern themselves, these could not be destroyed by military conquest. They lived on in the writings of Plato, in the histories of Thucydides, in the plays of Sophocles and Euripides that would continue to move human hearts long after the political Athens had fallen. The losses in population and property that Athens suffered in the war had a disastrous, albeit temporary, effect on its international power, revenues, and social cohesiveness. The word temporary is crucial here, for while the Athenian Empire was gone forever, the Athenian spirit, the belief in human dignity, in the power of reason, in the possibility of justice, would rise again in new forms in new times. As you imagine the Mediterranean twilight falling over the defeated city, picture not just the end of a war, but the end of an age. The confident optimism of the 5th century BCE, the belief that human reason and democratic institutions could solve any problem, had been tested in the furnace of war and found wanting. But from this testing would come new wisdom, deeper understanding, and ultimately a more mature vision of what it means to be human. The Peloponnesian War was the price Athens paid for its greatness. It learned that democracy, for all its virtues, is not immune to the corruption of power. It discovered that wealth and wisdom, however great, cannot protect a society from the fundamental contradictions of human nature. But in learning these hard truths, Athens left the world a legacy more valuable than any empire, the understanding that the greatest victories are not won on battlefields, but in the ongoing struggle to create just and decent societies. The wind still blows across the hills of Attica, carrying the scent of wild herbs and the memory of voices raised in debate. The stones of the Acropolis still stand, weathered but unbroken, reminding us that some things survive even the greatest disasters. And in the heart of every person who believes in democracy, in justice, in the possibility of human dignity, the true Athens lives on not as a place on a map, but as an idea whose time can never truly pass. The morning mist clung to the marble steps of the Athenian courthouse as citizens gathered in the early light of 399 BCE. Among them walked an old man of 70 years, his bare feet familiar with every stone pathway in the city. This was Socrates, the philosopher who had spent his entire life asking questions that made people uncomfortable, challenging assumptions that others took for granted. For decades, Socrates had wandered through the Agora, the gymnasium, and the symposiums of Athens, approaching young and old alike with his endless curiosity. He would stop a general and ask, "What is courage?" He would corner a priest and inquire, "What makes something holy?" He would question a politician about justice, a merchant about honesty, a poet about beauty. Always questions, always probing, always seeking deeper truth. The people of Athens had grown accustomed to this strange figure. Some found him amusing, others enlightening, and still others deeply irritating. But never before had he been brought to trial. What had changed? The city itself had changed. The long, devastating war with Sparta had ended just 5 years earlier, leaving Athens defeated, humiliated, and deeply suspicious of anyone who might threaten its fragile democracy. The charges against Socrates were serious: impiety toward the gods and corrupting the youth of Athens. The accusers claimed he failed to acknowledge the gods that the city recognized, and that he corrupted the minds of young Athenians. But those who knew him understood that his real crime was different. He had taught people to think for themselves. to question authority, to seek truth through reason rather than tradition. As Socrates stood before the jury of 500 citizens, he could have easily secured his freedom. A simple apology, a promise to stop teaching, a small fine paid by wealthy friends who admired him. Instead, he chose to defend his life's work with the same unflinching honesty that had defined his philosophy. "I have spent my life examining both myself and others," he told the jury, his voice carrying the weight of 7 decades of wisdom. "An unexamined life is not worth living for a human being. If you release me on the condition that I stop this practice, I must respectfully decline. I would rather die than abandon my calling." The courtroom fell silent. Here was a man choosing his principles over his life, his mission over his safety. Some jurors admired his courage. Others saw it as stubborn arrogance. The city that had once celebrated free inquiry now felt threatened by it. When the votes were counted, Socrates was found guilty of impiety and corrupting the young, sentenced to death. The margin was closer than expected, but the verdict was final. Athens had condemned its greatest philosopher to die in his final days. As he waited in prison for the ceremonial ship to return from Delos, Socrates received visitors who begged him to escape. His friend Crito had arranged everything: guards who could be bribed, a ship waiting in the harbor, safe passage to another city. But Socrates refused. He had spent his life teaching that we must live by our principles, and now he would demonstrate what that meant. On the appointed day, as the sun cast long shadows through the prison windows, Socrates gathered his friends. Around him, he was required to carry out his own execution by consuming a deadly potion of the poisonous plant hemlock. With steady hands and a calm voice, he spoke of the soul's journey and the pursuit of wisdom that continues beyond death. As the poison slowly numbed his body, Socrates continued to speak, to question, to teach. His last words were a reminder to his friend Crito about a small debt owed to the temple of Asclepius. Even in death, he honored his obligations, showing that a philosopher's life must be consistent to the very end. The great teacher of Athens fell silent, but his questions echoed through the centuries. The city had silenced one voice, but in doing so, it had made that voice immortal. Every generation since has grappled with the same tension between free thought and social order, between the individual conscience and the collective will. Athens had tested itself through the trial of Socrates, and in many ways it had failed its greatest test. The city that prided itself on wisdom and democracy had chosen fear over truth, conformity over inquiry. The hemlock that killed Socrates also poisoned something essential in the Athenian spirit. The glory days of Athens seemed like a distant dream in the decades following the trial of Socrates. The city had surrendered to Sparta in 404 BCE, ending the devastating Peloponnesian War, and with that surrender, something fundamental had changed in the character of the city, where once the agora had buzzed with confident debate about empire and expansion. Now conversations turned to survival and compromise. The long walls that had connected Athens to its port at Piraeus lay in ruins, torn down by Spartan decree. The powerful navy that had once ruled the Aegean was reduced to a handful of ships. The tribute that had flowed from hundreds of allied cities had ceased, leaving the treasury empty and the grand building projects abandoned. Athens lost its dominance in the region to Sparta, but more than political power had been lost. The confidence, the sense of destiny, the belief that Athens was chosen by the gods to lead the Greek world, all of this had crumbled along with the city walls. The democracy itself had become unstable, lurching between radical and moderate factions. In the immediate aftermath of defeat, the 30 tyrants had briefly seized control, supported by Spartan spears. These oligarchs, led by men like Critias, had unleashed a reign of terror upon the city. Thousands of citizens were killed or exiled, their property seized by the new rulers. The democracy that Athenians had cherished for over a century seemed fragile, perhaps even expendable. When democracy was restored, it came back wounded and suspicious. The very openness that had once been Athens' greatest strength now seemed like a dangerous weakness. The trial of Socrates was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of fear and blame-seeking. Other intellectuals and teachers found themselves under scrutiny. A city that had once welcomed foreign ideas and visiting scholars now viewed outsiders with suspicion. The economy, too, struggled to recover. The silver mines at Laurium, which had funded the Golden Age, were less productive. Trade routes that had once carried Athenian goods throughout the Mediterranean were now controlled by other powers. Many citizens found themselves impoverished, their family fortunes lost in the Long War or confiscated during the tyranny. Yet even in decline, Athens retained something precious. The schools of philosophy continued to attract students from across the Greek world. Plato, the most brilliant student of Socrates, established his academy just outside the city walls. Here, young men came to study mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy. They learned not just facts, but how to think, how to question, how to seek truth through reasoned inquiry. The theater, too, remained vibrant. While the great age of tragedy had passed with Sophocles and Euripides, comedy flourished. Playwrights like Aristophanes continued to satirize politics and society, providing an outlet for criticism and reflection that was essential to the democratic spirit. In the gymnasia and the symposiums, older men shared stories of the great days with younger generations who had never known Athens as an imperial power. They spoke of Marathon and Salamis, of Pericles and the building of the Parthenon, of the time when Athens had been the center of the civilized world. These stories kept alive the memory of greatness, even as the present seemed diminished. Cities' architecture told the story of this decline. New buildings were smaller, less ambitious. The marble that had once been quarried for grand temples was now used for more modest projects. The sculptures that adorned public spaces were competent, but lacked the inspired genius of the classical period. Athens was becoming a museum of its own former glory. Foreign affairs became a series of careful calculations rather than bold initiatives. Athens had to choose sides carefully in the conflicts between Sparta, Thebes, and the rising power of Macedonia to the north. No longer could the city dictate terms to allies or enemies. Now it had to negotiate from weakness, hoping to preserve what remained of its independence. The intellectual life of the city reflected this new reality. Where once philosophers had debated how to rule an empire, now they asked more fundamental questions about the nature of justice, the meaning of the good life, and the relationship between the individual and the state. The optimism of the Periclean age gave way to a more complex, sometimes darker, exploration of human nature and society. As the shadows lengthened across the Acropolis, thoughtful Athenians could not help but wonder whether their city's greatest days were behind them. The temples still stood, the democracy still functioned, and the schools still taught. But something essential had been lost, the sense that Athens was destined for greatness, that its ideas and institutions would shape the future of the world. Yet they could not know that even in this time of decline, Athens was preparing for one final, unexpected chapter in its remarkable story. North of Athens, in the rugged kingdom of Macedonia, a young man was dreaming dreams that would reshape the world. His name was Alexander, and he had been tutored by one of Athens' greatest philosophers, Aristotle. In the libraries and lecture halls of Athens, the ideas that would guide his conquests were taking shape. The city that had lost its political supremacy was about to influence the world in ways its citizens could never have imagined. Philip II of Macedonia had already demonstrated his military genius by defeating the combined forces of Athens and Thebes at the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BCE. Both Athens and Sparta were conquered less than a century later and made part of the Kingdom of Macedon. For the proud Athenians, this defeat was devastating. Their citizen soldiers, the same men who had voted in the assembly, had been overwhelmed by the professional Macedonian phalanx. But Philip, and later his son Alexander, proved to be surprisingly enlightened conquerors. Rather than destroying Athens or humiliating its people, they recognized the city's unique value as a center of learning and culture. Athens might no longer command fleets or collect tribute, but it still possessed something invaluable: the accumulated wisdom of 2 centuries of philosophical and artistic achievement. When Alexander inherited the throne in 336 BC, he inherited not just his father's army, but also his respect for Athenian culture. The young king had spent 3 years studying under Aristotle, learning not just strategy and statecraft, but also ethics, natural philosophy, and the art of governance. Through Aristotle, Alexander had absorbed the intellectual tradition of Athens, from the questioning methods of Socrates to the political theories of Plato. As Alexander embarked on his incredible journey of conquest, he carried with him a portable library that included works by Athenian poets, playwrights, and philosophers. Homer's epics traveled with him to India, but so did the tragedies of Euripides and the dialogues of Plato. The ideas born in the Adra of Athens would be discussed in the courts of Babylon and the cities of the Indus Valley. The conquest of the Persian Empire by Alexander brought unexpected benefits to Athens. The vast wealth of the Persian treasuries, distributed throughout the Greek world, helped revive trade and commerce. Athenian merchants found new markets for their goods, and the city's craftsmen were in demand for the beautification of new cities founded by Alexander across his empire. More importantly, the fusion of Greek and Persian cultures that Alexander promoted, what historians call Hellenism, had Athens at its intellectual heart. The schools of philosophy in Athens became training grounds for the administrators and teachers who would govern Alexander's vast empire. Young men from Egypt, Syria, and Bactria came to study in the academy and the lyceum, carrying Athenian ideas back to their homelands. The city experienced a remarkable intellectual renaissance during this period. While Alexander conquered the world with his armies, Athens conquered minds with its philosophers. The Stoic school, founded by Zeno of Citium, offered a philosophy perfectly suited to the cosmopolitan world Alexander had created. Stoicism taught that all human beings were citizens of a single, universal city, a revolutionary idea that would eventually influence Roman law and Christian theology. Epicurus, another philosopher who established his school in Athens during this period, offered a different, but equally influential vision of the good life. His philosophy of pleasure and tranquility attracted followers throughout the Mediterranean world. The Garden of Epicurus became as famous as the Academy of Plato, demonstrating that Athens remained the philosophical capital of the world, even as its political power waned. The city's artists and writers also benefited from the new cosmopolitan age. Athenian sculptors were commissioned to create portraits of Alexander and his successors. The distinctive style of Athenian art, with its emphasis on idealized human beauty and proportion, became the standard for the entire Hellenistic world. From Alexandria in Egypt to Seleucia in Mesopotamia, cities were built with Athenian-inspired architecture and decorated with Athenian-style sculptures. When Alexander died suddenly in Babylon in 323 BCE, his empire fragmented among his generals. But the cultural unity he had created, based largely on Athenian intellectual foundations, persisted. Greek became the language of learning and commerce from Spain to India. Athenian philosophical methods, literary forms, and artistic styles provided the common cultural vocabulary for this vast, diverse world. Athens itself, while no longer the center of political power, became something even more enduring, the acknowledged source of civilization itself. Young Romans would come to study in Athens, regarding it as the intellectual capital of the world. The phrase, carrying coals to Newcastle, had its ancient equivalent in carrying owls to Athens, both expressions meaning to take something to a place already abundantly supplied with it. The temples on the Acropolis, weathered by time but still magnificent, looked down on a city that had discovered a new form of immortality. Political empires rise and fall, but ideas endure. The Athens of Pericles had built an empire of ships and soldiers that lasted barely a century. The Athens of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle had built an empire of the mind that would last for millennia. As the golden light of evening fell across the marble columns of the Parthenon, reflecting off the olive trees that still grew on the slopes of the Acropolis, thoughtful observers might have realized that they were witnessing something unprecedented in human history. Athens had achieved a kind of immortality, not through military conquest, but through the power of human reason and creativity. The city had become eternal by becoming essential to the very idea of civilization itself. The last golden gleam of Athenian greatness was different from the first, but perhaps more precious. It was the light not of power, but of wisdom, not of dominion, but of understanding. And that light would never truly fade. Close your eyes and imagine yourself walking through the heart of modern Athens on a warm evening. The sun is setting behind the hills, painting the sky in soft shades of amber and rose. Above you, the ancient columns of the Parthenon catch the last golden light of day, standing exactly where they have stood for over 2,000 years. You are not alone on this path. Millions of others have walked here before you, drawn by something deeper than curiosity, deeper than tourism. They come, seeking connection with something that transcends time itself. The Acropolis continues to be a powerful symbol that speaks to the human spirit across centuries. As you breathe in the evening air, you might wonder what it is about this place that pulls at your heart. Perhaps it is the knowledge that here, in these very streets, ordinary people first dared to imagine that they could govern themselves. Democracy in ancient Athens was a unique and truly revolutionary system that realized its basic principle to an unprecedented and quite extreme extent. No polis had ever dared to give all its citizens equal political rights, regardless of their background or wealth. The gentle breeze carries with it the whispers of history. You can almost hear the voices of citizens gathering in the agora, debating the future of their city with passion and conviction. These were not professional politicians or career diplomats, but potters and farmers, sailors and merchants, all believing that their voices mattered, that their opinions could shape the world around them. Walk with me now through the shadows of evening toward the theater of Dionysus, where the great tragedies were first performed. Here, playwrights like Sophocles and Euripides explored the deepest questions of human existence, while audiences of thousands sat under the open sky, sharing in collective reflection about love, loss, justice, and fate. The very word theater comes from the Greek theatron, meaning place of seeing, for it was here that people learned to see themselves and their society more clearly. The stones beneath your feet have witnessed conversations that would echo through millennia. Socrates walked these paths, asking his endless questions, challenging everyone he met to examine their beliefs and assumptions. His student Plato founded his academy in the olive groves nearby, creating the world's first university, where young minds gathered to pursue knowledge for its own sake. The word academy itself carries Athens with it wherever it is spoken, a quiet reminder of this city's gift to learning. Rest for a moment on these ancient steps, worn smooth by countless feet over countless years. Feel the coolness of the marble against your palm. This stone was quarried from Mount Pentelicus, the same mountain that provided marble for the Parthenon. In your touch, you are connected to the hands of the craftsmen who shaped these blocks, the artists who carved the friezes, the architects who dreamed of perfect proportions reaching toward the sky. The Acropolis of Athens has been inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1987, recognized not merely as an ancient monument, but as a living symbol of human achievement. UNESCO cites the Acropolis as being the supreme expression of the adaptation of architecture to a natural site. Yet it represents something far greater than architectural mastery. It embodies humanity's eternal quest for beauty, truth, and meaning. Listen closely, and you might hear echoes of the great orators who once spoke from the Nix Hill nearby. Pericles himself stood there, speaking to assembled citizens about their city as a school for all of Greece. His words, preserved through centuries, still stir hearts today. He spoke of Athens as a city that belonged not just to Athenians, but to all who loved wisdom and beauty and freedom. The philosophers who walked these streets gave us words we still use daily. When we speak of philosophy, we use their term for love of wisdom. When we discuss politics, we invoke their word for the affairs of the polis, the city-state. Democracy itself carries within it the Greek words demos and kratos, the people and their power. For ancient Athenians, political participation was intertwined with leading an ethical life. Being part of a well-run society was seen as essential to human flourishing. As darkness gently settles over the city, the Parthenon above is illuminated by soft lights, its columns glowing like ancient guardians keeping watch over the modern world below. This is not merely a relic of the past, but a bridge across time. Every democracy that followed drew inspiration from the Athenian experiment. While Athenian democracy ultimately did not endure, its principles and structure influenced modern democratic systems, particularly concepts of public participation and checks and balances. The great libraries of the world still house copies of works first written here. Students in universities across every continent still read Plato's Republic, still grapple with Aristotle's Ethics, still watch performances of plays first staged in this very theater. The ideas born in ancient Athens have traveled farther than Alexander's armies ever did, reaching into hearts and minds in every corner of the earth. Even today, when citizens gather to vote, when students question their teachers, when playwrights explore the human condition, when architects seek harmony between form and function, the spirit of Athens lives again. It lives in every courthouse where justice is sought, in every school where knowledge is shared, in every public square where people gather to express their views. The legacy of Athens is not captured in any single monument or text, but in the continuing human aspiration for wisdom, beauty, and freedom. It reminds us that ordinary people, gathered together with good intentions, can create something extraordinary. It whispers to us that our highest calling is not merely to exist, but to think, to question, to create, and to participate in the great ongoing conversation of civilization. As you prepare to leave this sacred hill, take with you the quiet confidence that Athens instills. You are part of this continuing story. Every time you cast a vote, ask a question, appreciate beauty, or seek truth, you carry forward the flame that was first lit in this ancient city. The columns may stand silent now, but the ideas they represent continue to speak, generation after generation, in every language under the sun. Now, as our journey through time comes to its gentle close, allow yourself to sink deeper into this peaceful state of rest. The story of Athens is ending, but its echoes will continue in your dreams, in your thoughts, in the quiet moments when you remember that you are part of something larger than yourself. Picture yourself once more among those ancient columns, but now you are lying comfortably in their shadow as the Mediterranean stars begin to appear overhead. The marble beneath you has been warmed by the sun all day, and now it radiates that gentle heat back to you, cradling you like the earth itself. The wind that moves through these ruins is the same wind that filled the sails of Athenian ships 25 centuries ago. It carries with it the scent of wild herbs growing between the stones, the distant sound of waves against the shores of Piraeus, and something else, something indefinable, that speaks of permanence and peace. Athens taught the world that beauty and wisdom need not be the privilege of kings and priests alone, but can flourish wherever human beings gather with open hearts and questioning minds. This knowledge has never been lost. It has been passed down like a sacred flame from one generation to the next, sometimes bright, sometimes barely flickering, but never extinguished. As you rest here in imagination, feel yourself becoming part of this continuity. You are both ancient and modern, both individual and universal. The thoughts that formed in the minds of Athenian citizens still form in yours. The wonder that moved them as they watched the sun set behind the Parthenon is the same wonder that moves you now. Let the gentle rhythm of your breathing match the timeless rhythm of waves against the nearby shore. Feel your muscles relaxing completely, as if you were being held by the earth itself, supported by the accumulated wisdom of ages. Your mind can drift now, free to wander through the olive groves where Plato taught, through the marble halls where beauty was carved into stone, through the quiet spaces where great thoughts were born. The Athenian dream was never about empire or conquest, but about the possibility that human beings could live together in wisdom and beauty and mutual respect. That dream has not died. It lives in every act of kindness, every search for truth, every moment when people choose cooperation over conflict, understanding over ignorance. As sleep begins to embrace you, know that you carry within yourself the best of what Athens represented. Tomorrow, when you wake, you will still be part of this great human conversation that began so long ago in the shadow of the Acropolis. You will still be capable of wonder, of learning, of contributing your own voice to the ongoing story of civilization. The columns will stand through your dreams, patient and eternal, reminding you that some things endure beyond the reach of time. The wind will whisper through the stones, carrying messages of peace and wisdom, and you will rest deeply, knowing that you are connected to something beautiful and permanent and true. Sleep now, gentle traveler through time. Let Athens watch over your dreams. Let its legacy of wisdom and beauty and hope settle into your heart like morning dew, refreshing and life-giving. The ancient city's greatest gift was not its monuments of marble and gold, but its faith in the human capacity for greatness. That faith lives on in you. Rest well, and dream of golden light on white columns, of olive trees swaying in the wind, of voices raised not in anger, but in passionate pursuit of truth. Dream of Athens, and let Athens dream through you.